Australia has a long tradition of going to battle far from its shores. Tales of military bravery are etched in the national psyche. Now, young soldiers are returning from Afghanistan. 40 men died in Australia's longest war, but little attention is given to the walking wounded, dealing with dark demons.
The depression and the anxiety and the stress creep in, and your worst enemy is your own head. Eventually, the anxiety turns to anger and you slowly become a person that you don't want to be in.
Since Australia's involvement in Afghanistan began 13 years ago, soldier suicides at home have outnumbered their casualties. Many young veterans are also suffering post-traumatic stress disorder, characterised by mood swings and social withdrawal.
It's not a stigma, it's not a tag that says you're a weak person or you have not performed well. It can be addressed.
I'm Ambrose. On this edition of 101 East, we look at the war within, affecting thousands of Australian soldiers. Anzac Day is Australia's most important national occasion that honours the sacrifice and bravery of its soldiers. It's held annually to mark the first time Australian soldiers fought in World War I, a coming of age for a young country. Today, veterans from more recent conflicts march in cities and towns across the nation, like Morwell, in the state of Victoria. Glenn Fenton describes Anzac Day as a big funeral and gets through it in a drunken daze. After 2 tours of Afghanistan, alcoholism and antidepressants are his way of dealing with life since returning home. How much do you drink to kind of cope?
To be able to sleep, yeah, I'm looking at maybe 14 to 18 beers a day. It's something I know that I can help to deal with my anxiety issues with regard to the PTSD. It's the only thing I know that helps.
Has it led to problems though, drinking?
Absolutely. It's a symptom, not the cause. I lost my family. I've got 2 little girls that I don't even know when I'm going to see again. And that hurts a bit.
Some soldiers with PTSD avoid noise and people by fleeing to small rural areas. But Morwell is an industrial town with plenty of triggers. It's 11,000 kilometres from Afghanistan, but backfiring cars and diesel smells take Glenn back to Kandahar, where he maintained choppers on an airbase.
You might as well call a loud noise an injection of adrenaline. Any loud noise.
When are the times when you feel most lost?
About 4 o'clock in the afternoon. When it starts to get dark, that's when my anxiety level goes up, because, you know, for a good year of my life that I spent in Afghanistan, that's when people start throwing rockets at us.
Glenn's anxiety often leads to aggression. He's now estranged from his family, who still live near his old army base in Northern Australia.
Everywhere I went, they looked at me like I'm a junkie. My family don't understand. They don't want to know. When you try and talk about something, it's like, it's too hard.
What kinds of things do you wish you could convey to them? Your current state?
No. I hope they will never understand. I wouldn't wish that upon anyone.
His main support network is the Return Services League, or RSL, a social club for ex-soldiers found in most country towns and city suburbs. But Glenn is struggling to access health services here.
20 on heads!
And is on a waiting list for a hospital that helps veterans. Do you think you can be fixed to the point of what you were before you went to Afghanistan?
No. I find it very hard to function on a day-to-day basis. You know, I've got a brain in my head, I just can't remember where it is.
Glenn says veterans often struggle to fit back in, driving many to kill themselves. Soldier suicides in Australia are 3 times that of their combat losses in Afghanistan. But Glenn claims far more go unreported.
I've had a rope around my neck. I was that close. And there's a good 6 people that I know. Other than that, some of them were successful.
What stopped you?
I don't know, I passed out, woke up and went, I don't really want to do this. And that's, I guess you have to go low enough to know that you're never going to go there again. And I know I'm never going to go there again. Except passively.
Do you think that there are other ex-servicemen from Afghanistan in your position?
A lot of them. There's an avalanche coming. There is an absolute avalanche coming.
And this avalanche is not only coming from Afghanistan. Down the road, I meet Jamie State, who joined the army at 21 and served in an infantry battalion in Iraq. He says veterans of earlier conflicts still suffer and fall through a gap when they return home.
There's nothing. Nothing at all. You've gone from the best of care in the army, where it's all, you see the best surgeons, you get to see the best doctors. Like you're in the civil world, nothing. So that part there, no money, no nothing, is what our classes get.
Fellow officers nicknamed Jamie the Grey Man for his unassuming nature. His medical discharge led to a depression spiral, then alcohol and cocaine binges. Jamie moved back to Morwell to clean up his act, but he felt lost, invisible, the Grey Man once again, struggling to hold down work or relationships.
So it's like your brain's running at 1,000 miles per hour, and you've got all these thoughts in your brain, yet you cannot grasp one thought out of that mix, and you're just panicking. So you're just in fear. Like, I know myself, I'm just in fear.
What were you like a year ago?
I was shocking, yeah. I was just either high as a kite, so my mood was just right up and invincible. And then within 2 seconds, I'd be just suicidal pretty much.
Jamie ended up in a psychiatric ward after trying to kill himself at home in front of his mother. Why'd you do it?
Just had enough. Just over it, yeah. Had an absolute guffle, didn't know what's going on, just continually fighting with my parents and friends, and just got to a point where I was like, no, it's enough. Your life's nowhere near where you planned it. And the only reason I haven't done it is because I don't want that stigma on my parents of having a son who killed himself.
He struggles to leave his house after being diagnosed with PTSD, psychosis, and other mental health issues. How many tablets do you take a day to...
20 to 22 a day. I'm dictated by what the doctor says. You can't do that. As the doctor says, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this. Stuff like that, people always watching over me.
Jamie feels war changed him. He says he hates affection. But his dog Millie helps him keep to a strict routine that holds his life together. Throughout this whole episode of your life,
Yep.
who do you think's let you down?
Defence Force probably. What they show me, yeah. They couldn't care less. Once you're out, you're out. See you later. Not my problem.
At Morwell RSL, a rising number of young men are given help by Vietnam War veterans. Their trauma wasn't acknowledged 40 years ago, and all of these men have battled PTSD. They worry the neglect their generation endured is repeating itself today.
I believe for these our young contemporary veterans, the military have got a lot to answer for, because they claim, they test them psychiatric wise, they said you need to see a psychologist or that. They should wait weeks. When they come home, they want to do them then.
Where are the service gaps in helping people like Jamie and helping people like you?
In Vietnam, no national servicemen put out on the street and told to go. Today, hopefully, when they came back, they're taking discharge in a more singular person rather than as a large group. And they tend to get lost as a single person in the system.
In the Australian capital, Canberra, I've come to meet General David Hurley, the Chief of the Defence Force. He admits support for young veterans in the recent past was not effective enough.
I think if you went back to 2009, pre-2009, there were certainly, I think, some holes in the system that people may have felt that they weren't being appropriately attended to. We will still get individuals today who will say that, will feel and rightly say that I'm not being treated properly, and you can't cookie cut the overall response.
But General Hurley says more research into mental illnesses, links with welfare groups, and new awareness programs have helped. The Defence Force Chief believes rates of mental disorders in the Army are manageable.
You'll hear references to tsunamis and tidal waves, and you've read probably that I've objected to that sort of term. I think it's a call for arms, in a sense. We're aware that the numbers will increase, but I don't want to give people the impression that this will be such a huge increase in numbers that we're going to be swamped, or that individuals are going to be helpless.
And he wants to stop the underreporting of mental illness by soldiers.
If you put yourself in a position where you go on deployment, you disguise the fact that you're incapable of doing the job, and you put people's lives at risk, you've really got to have a good think about yourself and have a look at yourself. That is not the reason I give you responsibility in the organisation or trust you to lead people in the organisation.
Desperate to be deployed back to Afghanistan and to his old unit, Tyson Murray initially kept his PTSD secret from the Army. A commander of a high-risk search team, Tyson has struggled ever since 2 men in his platoon were killed by an improvised explosive device in 2010.
Standing there with one of my mates in my arms, and it hadn't really sunk in what had just happened. I was just in shock. You're hit with this sudden realisation that we're not indestructible. Sometimes things aren't always going to go to plan. It rocked me.
How do you come to terms with an event like that when you've got to keep on patrolling?
Yeah, well, dealing with the survivor guilt that came with being in a blast, that was another thing that just constantly ate away at me. I couldn't handle the fact that the boys had been killed and I'd got through it scot-free. They'd made the ultimate sacrifice, and it almost felt like that I hadn't given enough.
He survived the IEDs in Afghanistan, but when he returned to his home city of Brisbane, the disorder left him dealing with an emotional hand grenade.
If you let it, it'll slowly chip away at you. It'll plant a seed that over time just grows and festers into this vicious thing inside you. And you come back into society and all the monotonous rubbish that comes with society. And that slowly chips away at you. I was an absolute loose cannon. I'd drink until I'd pass out. I'd take unnecessary risks. Party drugs were just almost a weekly thing. I'd go out to a club and somebody would give me a pill, and I wouldn't even know what it was, but I'd still take it because I got the thrill and the excitement and the adrenaline from it.
When training on base, an exercise involving an IED led to a breakdown. Tyson was medically discharged and sent to alcohol rehab. He then joined an army support group called Mates for Mates. It has a recovery centre providing physical rehabilitation and psychological services.
I didn't want my friends and family to judge me. I didn't want people to look at me as being weak and being vulnerable and not being the soldier and the role model and that sort of stuff. And so I did whatever it took to suppress all those emotions and all those feelings and all that stuff that needed to be released. I kept it inside. And then when it finally did come out, I was physically and emotionally exhausted.
Tyson's mother Bev lives interstate, and she didn't know how to help her son.
Families can feel very isolated because very often the services are around where the base is, where the soldier or the veteran is. That's not necessarily where the family is. When Tyson comes back, you could see the anger in his face. And he would say things that were a bit racist, and it makes you confront your own morals. When they come home and you see them suffering, you're proud of them, but you're not so liking the army very much, because if they weren't in the army, then they wouldn't be like this.
Psychologist Janice Johnson helped Tyson at this centre. She says in most cases, families are the first responders to a veteran in trouble, but they often don't know what resources are there to help.
The biggest bucket of gold is spent on the serving member while they're still in. The next biggest bucket of gold is spent in the ex-serving area. So once they're out, you know, there's a lot of money spent there. And it's much bigger than it's ever been before, but the smallest bucket of gold is spent on family members.
This year, the federal government launched a national inquiry aimed at addressing mental health issues for young soldiers. Senator Michael Ronaldson is Australia's Veterans Affairs Minister.
What this nation did, and the mistake this nation made post-Vietnam, was that we did not acknowledge the issues, and B, we didn't move quickly enough to address them. And as the new minister, I've made it quite clear that it's not an issue as to how many people may or may not have PTSD or a mental health issue. One is too many.
But this year, Australia will spend far more money on marking the centenary of World War I than on veterans' welfare programs. The country's identity was forged on battlefields in Europe and Turkey, where 60,000 of its troops died to ensure an Allied victory. It's commemorated at memorials like this one in Canberra, and with more monuments per head of population than the rest of the world.
I want young Australians to understand the when, the where and the why. If we do that and they have that understanding, then those who have served now will have another generation or generations of young men and women who understand that sacrifice. Now, if they understand, they'll provide the support. If they don't understand, then they won't provide the support.
It's prompting some critics to question whether Australia is remembering the fallen from old wars at the expense of the walking wounded.
Well, I think we've got the balance incredibly wrong. I look at not only how we're spending new money, and we're clearly preferencing memorials and commemoration rather than new initiatives that actually help soldiers reintegrate into society.
There's been very few voices asking, what are we doing here?
James Brown is an army commander turned military analyst for a Sydney think tank. He's gravely concerned about the lack of research into modern Australian soldiers. In his controversial new book, James argues the gap between Australia's Defence Force and mainstream society is wider than other Western nations.
We're a country that really hasn't been touched by war, and most conflicts are a long way away from everyday life. Most of our military bases are outside of our big cities. So Australians just aren't really forced to think about, the unique problems that veterans have. I think a lot of Australians base their understanding of what the military does on movies and books of 100 years ago.
James says this disconnect is best seen when Australia commemorates its soldiers on Anzac Day, an experience he feels some young soldiers don't relate to.
It's becoming more divorced from the consequences of war. You go and feel emotion on Anzac Day, but you don't feel pain. The problem we have with our National Military Commemoration Day in Australia is that it's becoming a bit Disney-fied. It looks nice, it feels significant, but it doesn't really have any consequences. Sometimes we're missing some of the more important discussions about what war is about and some of the unpleasantries.
One charity, Soldier On, connects veterans with wider society through outdoor programs like sailing. Today, one of their organisers, Major Bronson Horan, is taking 2 ex-soldiers out on the water. Major Horan served as a US Army officer and an Australian commando until an IED explosion in Afghanistan left him with a brain injury.
Oh, dolphin. Our identity is wrapped around being in the Defence Force. It takes so much of one's life and energy and soul to have that identity, and all of a sudden to no longer have that, it can sometimes destroy people.
Well located given the parkland.
Many of those he helps struggle with domestic violence, homelessness and criminal behaviour. Major Horan says in America, troubled veterans are more visible because the government surveys and monitors them when they return home.
In America, there are, like you said, large organizations, and they can do some fantastic things because of economy of scale. How do you get the guy who's been sitting on the couch for 2 years, how do you get him back out on the street? How do you inspire him to do something? I'm not sure if it does help them with the memories, but I am sure that it helps them to get out of the house. And, every journey starts with 1 foot going forward. But it has been proven that when groups of people get together and commingle in a positive environment, that it is beneficial for their psychiatric health.
Tyson Murray agrees. He works as a liaison officer at the recovery centre that helped him and believes soldiers need goals to drive towards.
What is it about goals that make it so critical to the recovery?
Everyone needs something that they can dedicate their time and energy to, and if you don't have something to work towards, then you just self-analyse and criticise. The fear of letting go of army, that terrified me. Like, I didn't want to let it go. It was such a huge part of me. But when you look at something that scares you, it also stimulates you and makes you curious. Once you commit yourself to an idea and just do whatever it takes to achieve that, then you'll achieve amazing things.
Back in Morwell, Jamie State is now venturing out of the house for 5 hours a day. The Iraq veteran is dedicating his time to training hard for triathlon events. Like Tyson, Jamie has found rigorous exercise gives him purpose and focus. He wants to start fitness classes at the RSL for ex-soldiers.
The help and the kindness they've shown me, I want to return. And my overall goal is to become a qualified exercise physiologist or exercise science. Because I believe that they need to use that in part of their programs to help the veterans. Like, exercise is a massive thing. And when PTSD or whatever illness you have takes over, that's the last thing you're going to do is exercise. And that's, for me, that was years. That was the last thing I ever wanted to do was exercise. And I was talking to one of the doctors from the Repat Centre, and I asked him, I said, do you use exercise physiologists in your program? And his words exactly were, not enough.
45,000 Australian soldiers have returned from combat in the last 15 years. The military estimates 1 in 5 of them will face mental health problems after their service. For some young veterans in Australia, home is a culture shock, a loss of status, a psychological minefield they navigate alone. Without more attention and support, many of those who put their life on the line will be forever in a battle.